20 years since the dictatorship of Sani Abacha murdered Ken Saro-Wiwa, writer, environmentalist, and social justice activist for the Ogoni people of southern Nigeria. Murdered on November 9, 1995, together with 8 of his comrades. Ken Saro-Wiwa is the subject of this week's edition of Punchback, the Bambazuka news production that brings you comment and analysis of Pan-African issues from a Pan-Africanist perspective with me, Henry Makori. Welcome. Nigeria has been producing oil since the 1960s. It is in fact Africa's leading oil producer, and the bulk of this oil comes from the south, in the Niger Delta, and including a place called Ogoni land, where there live the Ogoni people, an ethnic minority. Growing up as an Ogoni boy, Ken noticed two things. That first, a lot of oil was coming out of Ogoni land, and yet the Ogoni people were not benefiting from this oil. Poverty was still very rampant, and most of the oil wealth benefited Shell and other international multinational oil companies that extracted oil from this region and the rest of the country. But being an ethnic minority, the Ogonis benefited very little. Secondly, Ken Saro-Wiwa noticed another thing, that there was devastation of Ogoni land from the activities of Shell and other oil companies. Oil spills were happening very frequently, and farmlands were being destroyed. Water was contaminated. Fishing areas were poisoned. Farmlands were completely devastated. And so the lives of the Ogoni was in danger, and nobody was paying attention. The production of oil was completely reckless. And it was like a conspiracy between the Shell and other oil companies and the Nigerian government to the disadvantage of the Ogoni people. And this is really what troubled Ken as he grew up. And he thought of ways in which he could work with other people to save the Ogoni people, to save his own people, his own homeland, and to see that the Ogoni people also got a share of this great resource that was in their soil.
The United Nations recognizes the rights of all the world's indigenous people. Indigenous people have been cheated through laws such as are operated in Nigeria today. We are going to demand our rights peacefully, non-violently, and we shall win. From today onwards, Shell is declared persona non grata in Ogoni.
Ken Saro-Wiwa and other Ogonis began to organize a non-violent struggle against Shell and against the federal government of Nigeria. They organized people, they mobilized people, and alerted them to the devastation that was taking place in their own land. And so they made protests and appeals to the Nigerian government and to Shell and other oil companies. But all these appeals, all these protests fell on deaf ears. Now Ken Saro-Wiwa went ahead with the others and formed an organization called MOSOP. It is the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people. And they wanted to use this movement as a vehicle to address their grievances to the government of Nigeria and to the oil companies. They suffered a lot of repression. During the military dictatorships in Nigeria, there was a lot of military expeditions sent to suppress the rebellion. The frustrations of the people of Ogoni land were being repressed by the government of Nigeria. But Ken Saro-Wiwa and his people completely refused to give up their revolution, their rebellion, and they pushed on, demanding that they will have to get a justice on the basis of the issues that were happening in their own land, Ogoni land. Ken Saro-Wiwa and the others led the formation of a Bill of Rights, which they called the Ogoni Bill of Rights. This Bill of Rights they presented to the federal government of Nigeria, to Shell and the oil companies operating in that area. And the Bill of Rights had 3 points, among others. Key 3 points were increased autonomy for the Ogoni people, increased share of the oil wealth for the Ogonis, and thirdly, there was to be a cleanup of the environment that had been extensively damaged through the activities of oil extraction. When this Bill of Rights was presented to the Nigerian government and the oil companies and the government ignored it. Now, Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogonis had no option. In 1993, they organized a huge protest in Ogoniland. It is estimated that 300,000 Ogonis came out in protest to articulate their grievances to the Nigerian people and to the Nigerian government rather, and to the oil companies. Now, what response was there from the Nigerian government? Deaf ears again, and in many instances, these protests were put down violently. Now, Ogoniland, there was no peace, as you can imagine, during this time, because the people were angry and the government was not listening to them. Now, one incident happened the following year in 1994, an incident that Ken Saro-Wiwa was completely not associated with. 4 prominent Ogoni chiefs were murdered in unclear circumstances. At this time, Ken Saro-Wiwa was not anywhere near the crime scene, but he and several other Ogoni leaders were arrested by the Nigerian government and charged with the murder of these 4 prominent chiefs. There was an international outcry because nobody believed that in the Nigerian government at this time, under the administration of Sani Abacha, will do any justice for these activists. But then the Abacha regime did not heed it. There was demand for justice for the Ogoni 9, as they were called. That's Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 of his comrades. What happened is that after they spent months in prison without trial, they eventually faced the military tribunal, which tried them and found them guilty. They were transported on one day, that is November 10, 1995. 20 years ago, Ken Saro-Wiwa and his 8 comrades were transported to the city of Port Harcourt, where they were hanged by the neck. Ken Saro-Wiwa and his comrades died innocent men. They died defiant, rejecting the activities of Shell that were destroying the land of their people and the failure of their own government, a government that is supposed to serve the interests of the people, to protect the interests of the Ogonis. They died innocent men, refusing to accept that the kind of devastation that was going on in Ogoniland should continue. And so they died martyrs to the cause of social justice. Now, was their death in vain? Not at all. The government of Nigeria later invited the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, to conduct a study in Ogoniland, which established very high levels of environmental degradation. In one place, they found that contamination of surface water to the extent was 900 times beyond the acceptable limits of chemicals that cause cancer. UNEP report estimated that it will take between 25 and 30 years to clean up the environment in Ogoniland. It will require an initial $1 billion to begin the exercise, and that exercise has not even started. How is it that the lives of the Ogoni, a minority ethnic community in southern Nigeria, could be considered useless in the pursuit of profit by multinationals? Here is a government that is in place, that is supposed to serve the interests of its people, but instead seeks to please the profit attentions of multinational companies like Shell. In fact, since this extraction of oil started in Nigeria in the 1960s, Shell controls about 50% of the oil that is produced in Nigeria. This is the problem that we have of resource curse, the so-called resource curse, that countries or areas where there are huge reserves of natural resources, they become unstable. Why? Because there is always a contest for those resources, and often it is a collusion between multinational companies, multinational business organizations, and local governments that collude to extract the resources, to make the profits, to make the money, but then at the expense of the local people. Often there are two expenses that the local people have to pay. First, They benefit very little. Poverty continues in those places. And secondly, usually there is extensive environmental degradation, as is the case with the Ogoni. The question of resource conflict between multinational companies and local people continues. It has not stopped in Ogoni land, although Shell company left 20 years ago never to return because of the determination of a small community of people who decided that they were better dead than to witness the kind of devastation that Shell was doing in collusion with the government. Now here, in your own situation, in every situation across Africa, there are questions of these resource conflicts, or there are other issues of social justice. What is your role? How do you want to be remembered? Are you ready to be the next Ken Saro-Wiwa? Do we need more Ken Saro-Wiwas? Certainly yes. So what are you going to do? When are you going to rise up from your comfort zone and join in the social struggles of your people? And join in the struggle for freedom and justice for your people? Your people need you. Your nation needs you. Your community needs you. There are needs in these areas. There are issues of social justice that you need to take up. You need to identify those struggles and embrace them and offer yourself in total commitment in the example of Ken Saro-Wiwa.